Okay, picking up where we left off on page 425, we're talking about Ethernet. Now, the Ethernet standard is more, it's not really talking about cabling, not necessarily. It's talking about a method of accessing data on a network. And so, I mentioned to you before that this ring network had this scenario where I have to wait my turn before I can talk. And so, the ring network is designed for this next item called token ring. So, on page 425, they talk about token ring. It's an older technology. I don't see it that much anymore. But the difference between Ethernet and token ring is Ethernet, I just start blurting out, and the machine will tell me, wait, you talked on top of somebody. Can you just hang on a second, try that again? So it has a bizarre way of controlling crosstalk, two people talking at the same time. It's just kind of happenstance and random. This, I have to wait my turn. So I get a little flag that says, hey, it's your turn. I go, oh, blur, and I talk, and then boop, light goes away, so to speak, and so I quit talking again. So this is actually a little bit more efficient than Ethernet in a lot of ways, but never really caught on, and so now practically everyone is using Ethernet. On page 425, we're talking about TCP/IP. You've probably heard the terms, right? Transmission Control Protocol over Internet Protocol. There's a goofy little diagram, and the thing I'm really trying to get to you, if I'm on a machine and I want to send data to this machine, let's say I'm doing an email, for example, and it has to go to a router and then somebody else's router, and it finally ends up at host number B. Here's how it actually works. I'm inside my email application. And then it says, I need to encode this into something that the network understands, like TCP/IP. And then I send it through the internet. And then I send it through Ethernet. And so Ethernet goes through, and it goes through and goes through. So it's a layered cake, so to speak. With the lowest levels of this model is the physical wire. And then up from that is like the cabling scheme, like Ethernet. And up from that is the protocol, like TCP/IP. And up from that is the application, like email. So it's a stack of things that make it work. And so to traverse the stack, you basically, start at the application, and going down, you get scooted over to the other machine that has to come all the way back up. Anyway, it's a kind of an unusual kind of a model, but it's something that you should be familiar with. Okay, so we talked about communication standard being like the Ethernet and token ring, and we talked about protocols such as TCP/IP. There are a gazillion of these things, okay? But knowing those three is probably a good place to start. So let's continue on. On page 427, they talk about Wi-Fi. Now, I think everyone knows what Wi-Fi is. It's basically, it is a standard. It has an honest-to-God standard name, 802.11, and then there's, A, B, C, G, N, A, C, lots of little, add-ons at the end of that thing. But all it is a technique for me to send messages wirelessly. And so instead of I'm still using TCP/IP for the most part, but I'm not using Ethernet to send it through, and I'm not having a physical cable. So in this particular case, this part of the diagram right here gets taken out. Okay, so Wi-Fi. All right. Bluetooth. Bluetooth is another one of those rather small range guys, the personal area network kind of guys, range of a few feet. And it's really designed for things like, I've got a wireless headset for my phone, so I can do hands-free call while I'm driving, that kind of stuff. Bluetooth. I have Bluetooth speakers for my smartphone. I have all these things where relatively short range, designed, of course, to eliminate me having to have a bunch of wires. Ultra wideband. So on page 429, ultra wideband is kind of the science fiction stuff that we don't ever really get into. It's used like by the military. What they do is they encode a message. Instead of sending it on one single frequency, they take the message and they blast it over a huge range of frequencies for an extraordinarily short burst. A single burst, just a blip, and we're talking, thousandth of a second less You know, less than a thousandth of a second blip, just a one tiny little spike. And the reason why they blast it over a huge radio range is it's practically impossible for the enemy to jam all radio frequencies. They make it they jam some here and some there, but it would be practically impossible to jam them all. So this ultra wideband stuff is something that you would never use, but being used in the military. Infrared, you know, the TV remote. You know, you push a button on the remote and it works pretty good, right? But you know, it's line of sight. You know, if you got a kid standing in front of the TV while you're trying to change the channel, it's probably not going to work, right? It's line of sight, so it's very good. But unlike wireless, where it can kind of bounce around the room or go through things, you know, it's definitely line of sight. And then radio frequency, RFID. You know, those little tags. We've talked about before how, you know, if you go into a store and you have one of those loss prevention kind of a scenarios where you got at the entrance of the store, you got these little things with the big loops. And so I buy a product and I've got a little sticker on there, and as I walk through there, they can detect whether or not I've been to the cash register or not. That's a passive radio frequency ID. So is that really a network? Well, not really, but hey, it's in the textbook. Okay, so let's talk about another technique for using RFID. This is a very common scenario. So I want to go through, you know, the toll roads here in Texas, or I want to go on to a military base. So I would have a little RFID tag stuck up in the corner of my windshield, and as I come up, they can read that and tell who I am, tell that my car is who the car is supposed to be. Or if I'm zipping down the road, I don't even have to stop, right? I could just, you know, 65, 70 miles an hour, zip right on through the toll gate on the toll road, and they just read the tag, take a picture of my license plate, for example, as an alternative. And once again, how is this all related to networks and communication? I'm not exactly certain, but it is kind of cool. Okay, let's continue. On page 430, they talk about near-field communication. This is kind of big. In other countries, it is very common for someone to use their phone to be able to purchase goods and services just as if you were using it like a debit card, credit card. You know, you go to a vending machine, you say, I want a soda, and then you just take your phone and just boop, pop it, so to speak, tap it onto the surface, and near-field communication. And now near-field communication, the range was deliberately designed to be, you know, just a few inches, so that no one standing around you could intercept that message. You know, unlike Bluetooth with a range of, you know, 30 feet, you know, this has a range of just a few inches. Okay, so near-field communication. Not really used that much in the U.S., but in the Asian continent, it's getting there. It's getting there. The next one on page 431, they talk about WiMAX, kind of as an alternative to using some of the cellular phone system. They have a microwave range kind of a scenario where instead of using radio waves, I'm using radio waves way up into the microwave range. And the problem is that WiMAX was a pretty advanced technology. You know, it had a range of about 30 miles. That's pretty doggone good. So if I wanted to cover, like, for example, if I had internet access to a small city, I could probably put up, you know, 10 or 15 towers, and I would have the entire city saturated with, you know, pretty decent signal strength, and you'd be ready to rock and roll. The problem is, it just didn't pan out. It's a fantastic technology, but it just got subsumed by just a traditional cell phone kind of a thing. One of the things that we talked about is that, first of all, there's a company called Clearwire, which is the U.S. company that was doing WiMAX. They got bought out by Sprint in, I don't know, a couple years ago, and now Sprint has said, look, we're shutting them all down. So essentially, WiMAX in the United States is dead. Okay, no more service. If you have a phone or one of those you know, Clearwire modems, well, then they're going to quit working probably within a year or so because their service is being shut down. All right, good service, don't get me wrong, but it just got subsumed by, you know, the 4G towers for cell phones just got so much better that they were almost identical in what they could provide. Okay, kind of weird, huh? Let's continue. On page 431, they talk about the communications software. Help users establish a connection, to another computer and device or network. Yeah, so you need some sort of piece of software that says, hey, I would like to join your wireless network, as an example. Or if it was a cabled kind of a scenario, I plug a cable in. It has to have some sort of discovery that says, wait a minute, I see a network. What the heck is this? Wait, this is the foreign network. What should I do? So there's some steps that have to happen inside your machine to enroll you into a network. Now, not all networks are enrollable. You go to a hardened site, for example. Again, you go into a military installation and you take your laptop with you and you just jack it into the wall. You're not going to get anything because they've got it all tied down. So manage the transmission of data, instructions, and information. Yeah, for example, what if I'm just doing a file transfer? There's a piece of software called File Transfer Protocol. And so it just allows me to transfer files back and forth. And it makes sure that I'm not sending it too fast or receiving it too slow. So it does all sorts of cool stuff to make it better. Provides an interface for the users to communicate with one another. We're talking about email and chat and even the Internet Explorer kind of a scenario, web browser. So yes, the software has to do the connection. It has to actually do the transferring behind the scenes, and it has to have some sort of a user interface to let the poor human know what's going on. So let's continue. On page 432, they talk about communication lines. Now we're talking about the physical thing, the cabling, for example, that runs through. And they talk about dedicated line. Now, they do mention digital dedicated line, but just hang on a second. The analog digital lines, those are no more. If you were to go to your local phone company and say, I would like an analog, honest to God, physical dedicated line from point A to point B, they would basically tell you, we don't do that anymore. It's just not done. So that's not really an option. Now the digital version of that, that is an option. You could say I want a phone line that's connected 24/7. I don't have to dial to make anything connect. I've got devices on each end, kind of a thing. Okay, but again, that's kind of sort of rare. On page 433 are the more common things, like the television cable, the cable TV people are running coaxial cable all over your town, and you can contract with them for phone service and television service and internet service, right? Then you have the DSL, and the DSL came out of the phone company kind of a scenario, where I have phone line coming to my house, and then it splits, so to speak, between my data service and my phone service. And the most common connection for a home is what's called asymmetrical DSL, the digital subscriber line. And what that basically means is my download speed is much, much faster than my upload speed, which is perfectly normal in a typical home, because when I'm doing browsing, all I'm doing is clicking on a mouse and sending just a few bytes up, and then I get a whole page back. So that scenario works great. However, if I wanted to allow someone into my machine, I call out my bud and say, hey, I just opened up a share. Why don't you go through the internet and grab that file? Well, my upload speed, right, is what he's going to see as his download speed. You kind of get what I'm at? I'm sitting here at my house, and I have an upload speed of 500K, okay, going up. Well, that is what he uses to get to me. So asymmetrical works only if you're doing a lot of downloading. If you turn right around and said, I want to host a website at home, asymmetrical would not work at all. People would get so frustrated they would never come to your website. It would be so incredibly slow. And obviously the optional is having a symmetrical DSL, which of course costs more money. Why, of course. Why wouldn't it? Okay, this is a good place to stop for the 15-minute mark. We'll pick this thing up again in just a few.